Hello YouTube, my name's Sean Connors and welcome back to The Outsiders. And this is video 2 in the Sherlock Holmes series where I compare my GMing style to Sherlock Holmes and I go in detail about it. And obviously a few questions came out from the first video. Thank you for those from the audience, and I'm going to touch on those in this second video, which makes sense, but not straight away. I want to read something to you and then apply some of my own logic to it, and it'll make a lot of sense. My view is this. I think if we really look at Arthur Conan Doyle's work in regards to Sherlock Holmes, his own estimation of Sherlock Holmes, we can see from the onset that it's an embodiment of the scientific. I don't think that's unfair to say that. An ideal that we could aspire to, if never emulate altogether. After all, what are ideals for if not just to be a little bit out of reach? Now, how apt is that? Because when you think about it, we've always said that we treat the GMing, I treat it like, I look at it like the Holy Grail. You try your best to do the best you can. You aim for that golden cup, that special place, that little something where everything is perfect, and you never quite reach it, but you aspire to it. Isn't that very, very, very similar? Those words I've just used really are actually Conan Doyle's actual own words and his own diary words. So it's actually incredibly apt and makes a tremendous amount of sense that the two goals are so closely linked. So there's Sherlock, the scientific, something to aspire to, and DMing, trying to get that perfect game, trying to do the best that you can do always, is something to aspire to. The two things, although strangely, are actually intimately linked. And I had never seen the connection before, but it's there, and it's there to be seen. I'm now going to quickly talk about what this episode is all about. And really what this is all about in this episode is all about understanding yourself. Now in the first one we talked about understanding the basics, but there is a very important concept to understanding the basics that Sherlock Holmes highlights incredibly well, and it came out in one of the questions that was sent to me, and that question was sent by Emergent Play. I'm just going to take a moment to look at that question, so bear with us a split second. As you can see, as Emergent Play says, if you're going to challenge the basics, you have to be ready to challenge the assumptions as well. And I totally agree with that. And that was going to be part of this second video, and it is going to be part of it. But I'm so glad he asked the question, because the truth of it is that Sherlock Holmes, what he does at every turn, never takes anything at face value. It doesn't matter whether you say to him, you know, the Earth orbits the Sun. To Sherlock Holmes' world, some facts are totally irrelevant. They're not important. He will challenge every piece of evidence that is presented to him, no matter what anybody says. So no matter what in this case, GM says or does. This is how I do it. This is the way that it works for me. He will challenge every single thing. He will put it into practice. He will try it. And the reason that he will try it in his own way of working is that his basics are made up of many years of constantly challenging himself. It sounds so familiar, doesn't it? Constantly challenging himself so that he can say which basics are relevant to him, what works. And that way, that scientific approach of actually trying things out and making them, seeing they work for you, has rounded Holmes off to be this person that in some ways is quite childlike. And I'm going to try and explain that childhood piece, if I can, in a little bit more detail. And again, I'm going to read from some notes that I've made, so bear with me a moment. So I'm now going to read you some notes, and hopefully these will be relevant to what we first spoke about in the first video. So I said in the first video about the staircase, and I think it's fair to say this. I think all too often when it comes to our own minds, we are surprisingly mindless. You know, we sail on, blithely unaware of how much we're missing, of how little we grasp of our own thought processes, and how much better we could be if we'd taken the time to understand and reflect. I think it's very apt as well, and we're talking about details here, it's very apt in DMing, because we run the game and that's great, and we don't give ourselves any time to reflect on it. Don't give ourselves any time to see what worked, what didn't work so well, and really think about those things. It's something I've been doing for years. I've always been I've always said I'm always my most harsh critic, and again this is very apt here. I'm just going to talk about Watson for a second. You know, like Watson, who plodded along the same staircase tens, hundreds, thousands of times, multiple times a day, he couldn't recall the number of stairs. In fact, actually, to be honest, I would actually say that he probably couldn't, if Holmes had actually challenged him about the colour, he probably couldn't have remembered that, because we're all very similar, we all do these sort of things. It's not that we're not capable of doing it, it's just that we choose not to. This is where I'm going here. So if you think back to your own childhood, chances are, if I asked you to tell me about the street you grew up on, you'd be able to recall many details. The colours of the houses, the quirks of the neighbours, the smells of the seasons, how different the streets were at the different times of the day, where you played, where you walked, your friends were, where there were areas where you were afraid to walk. You could go on for hours. And as children, we were remarkably aware. We absorb and process information, as I've spoken about in other videos before, incredibly well and at high speed. We'll never again come close to achieving this. New sights, new sounds, new smells, new people, new emotions, new experiences. We are learning about our world and its possibilities. Everything is new, everything is exciting, everything engenders curiosity. And because of this inherent newness of our surroundings, we are acquisitively alert. We absorb, we take it all in. And that, quintessentially, is Holmes. Quintessentially, that's what he does in his world. And is very apt in us as GMs. It is so easy to run a session in a nice way and take nothing from it. Now, I know, as I've said, that I can only speak for myself. My style is very, very close, I think, to Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes has indirectly helped create my GMing style. The way that I look at things, the way that I approach things, the way that I absorb things and take them on. It is a very strange thing, but I believe, on my particular case, I think it's very, very apt and really important to examine these things and see what we can learn from it. So I'm sharing that with you and answering that question because I think it's particularly apt. I'm going to come on to another question that came out of the first video, so again, bear with me one moment. We just looked at Captain Gothnog's question there. Well, not really a question. He explains why he likes Jeremy Brett. And I need to quickly come back to. I talked about at the beginning that I've always loved reading the books of Sherlock Holmes. I'm also a huge fan of anything that comes out to do with Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I suppose really logically, that's an obvious thing to say because if you think about it, again drawing conclusions. Of course, I watch everything. There are a lot of modern ones. Robbie Downey Jr. is playing one. At the moment, Elementary, you've got, I forget his name actually, I'm terrible, but there's the BBC version as well, brilliant version, both great versions, but I agree with Captain Gothnog. My particular version is Jeremy Brett as well. I love Jeremy Brett as the Sherlock Holmes, and it's personally because he did over 50 episodes of Sherlock Holmes on BBC Granada years ago. He literally gave his life to the role. He threw himself into the part, so much so that I really believe it had an impact on him personally. I think he went into the highs and lows of Sherlock, and I think it had a massive impact on him, but his body of work for Sherlock Holmes will always live on, and fabulous. I mean, there's no two ways about it in my mind. He is the quintessential Holmes. But there's a point to this, because when we talk about DMs, you see, and what makes great analogy here with Sherlock is the fact that we all have our ideal of what a DM is, and we all meet people in our life that we run up against, if you like, not against, but we run up with. That's probably the wrong choice of words, but we meet in life who are great DMs. I met one a year or plus ago who I thought was fabulous, Tony. Marvellous GM over in Warwickshire, fabulous GM, great way to capture the audience. He had a great presence around him. I loved his theatrics that he was able to do, which really stands out to me. So when I think of a DM, he definitely comes into my radar. He definitely, when people say, I'd like to improve my DMing, his face really hits that point. And there are several things that he did were exceptional. So we all will have that something in our mind about what we're trying to do when we GM. We'll have somebody that we want to emulate. It's a bit like me, I mean, in a weird, crude way. you know, yeah, Sherlock has influenced my RPG style. There's no doubt about that in my mind. I mean, the more I look at it, the more I sort of dissect the thing, the more I think, you know, that's true. You know, it really becomes to me fairly obvious. But Tony was that GM for me, and he definitely, you know, made me think, yeah, I've got to raise my game. I've got to improve. I've got to, you know, I want to be seen in that same category. And it's great when you meet people like that who push you along in a nice way, who want to get the best out of you. And I think we helped each other for the period of time that we knew each other. It's a shame we lost contact, but he really was a great GM. But I'm sharing that with you. And now we're going to move on to the final bit today. So when we have examined the basics, it takes years. It's obvious why it takes years, isn't it, when you think about basics? I mean, there's a lot to cover as a GM. And those basics are going to be exactly like we discussed in this video. They're going to take time for you to go through each thing people tell you. So to really try it out. I roll the dice openly. I roll them behind the screen. You need to find your method. You need to find your voice. This is what really finding your voice is all about, isn't it? It's about finding you as GM. What works for you. And you've got to understand the reasons why it works for you. Because if you don't, then you're just doing it and it has no purpose whatsoever. It's actually meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. You don't understand why it works. So this is the reason why basics do take a few years to get the foundation right before you can move on beyond the basics to some more profound findings. And that's why, if I may leave this video this way, that's why Holmes uses the word elementary. That's the reason why the word is there, because for him those things are second nature. Now the importance of the basics are simple. This is why Holmes is able to go to the rooftop in the first video with Watson, be challenged, and actually pick the correct telescope and find a plane within a matter of moments, because he mastered the basics. It's the same as if you need to pluck an NPC out of your head. It's the same as if you have to decide the right thing to do at that moment within a game. Do I do a cutscene here? Do I do some clever visionary piece? Do I just go with the flow? Do I let the players take the direction here? Do I let them do these things? These are actually basics. But they're important because without them you can't possibly attempt to tempt those things. You just can't. It's not possible because everything is guesswork. So that's the critical part to basics. Anyway, that's been the second video really. I suppose the best way to describe the second one is about knowing yourself. That's the reality. It is about knowing yourself, and that comes from understanding the basics. I've been Sean Connors. This has been Outsiders. Till the next time, take care of yourselves and happy gaming. Bye bye.